In this module, we're going to walk you through installing and configuring your own systems so that you can complete the labs in the related workbook for this course. First, we're going to have you configure your machine with Couchbase 4.0. 4.0 because you're learning Nickel. You'll configure it for learning purposes as a one-node cluster running off localhost. To install Couchbase Server, you'll go out to the Couchbase website to the download link. Scroll to select Couchbase Server 4.0 Enterprise Edition, and then choose your operating system. There are several available. Read the installation instructions, which you can click to directly from that page, specific to your operating system. Then download Couchbase and install it. During the installation process, you'll pass through a setup wizard. This is going to configure your database and index paths, your server host name, whether you're joining or starting a new cluster, what services should you deploy, data, index, and/or query, or in our case for this course, all three, and then what are the RAM quotas for the data and index services. You can choose to install sample datasets. You could set the per node RAM quota as well. You choose whether or not documents should be replicated. You can set whether or not disk I/O should be optimized in certain ways. You can enable bucket flush, which allows you to dump all data within a particular bucket through an administrative toggle. It's useful during development. You will have the chance to register and choose whether to receive update notices about the product, and then of course assign your initial credentials. Once installed, you're going to browse to localhost 127.001.8091. Here, you'll see a menu with Overview, Server Nodes, Data Buckets, Views, Index, XDCR, Log, and Settings. Let's quickly review what these are about. First, Cluster Overview is going to show you cluster-wide statistics. Server Nodes is where you would add, remove, and configure individual nodes for your cluster. Data buckets, as we'll talk about further in this course, are where you create and manage your top-level data containers. The View screen allows you to create and configure distributed secondary indexes, but our focus in this course would be on the global secondary indexes supported by Nickel. Those you would find under the Index tab once they'd been created. However, they would normally be created through the terminal, as you'll see in upcoming modules of this course. XDCR allows you to configure and control cross-data center replication. Log is where you can review your cluster-wide log files, and Settings is a screen for configuring cluster-wide settings. Other courses go into all of this in more detail. To get at your labs and your code, in the Learning Management System, you'll download CB110 Datasets Archive, also CB110 Lab Workbook. You'll then want to extract the datasets archive to your home folder or desktop. There will be 4 zip files available, all of them relating to a bucket that we will create called Couch Music 1, and 4 separate document sets for countries, playlists, tracks, and user profiles. Then, after watching each video here in the Learning Management System, you'll follow the provided workbook to complete each lab. So, a few learning points to help you through the first lab. How do you bulk load documents into a bucket? Well, for that, you're going to use a tool called CBdockloader. The workbook will show you where to find it. This allows you to bulk load JSON documents from a directory or archive into a specified data bucket in Couchbase. So it looks like this: CBdockloader, a set of options, and then either a directory or you point to an archive. Various flags are available to specify the username, password, the bucket name to load or create if it does not yet exist, the IP and port of the node that you're going to load the data to, and then the RAM quota in megabytes if the bucket does not yet exist. If it already does exist, you could omit that setting. Now, once you've created the bucket, you're going to be running queries. You'll do this in this course using a command line tool called CBQ, which allows you to execute Nickel queries. It's simply CBQ followed by a set of options to launch it. You can specify an alternate URL or port. By default, it's going to assume you're running against a Couchbase server at localhost. 8093 to be specific, and you can alternately run it in quiet mode to enable or disable a startup message, which might be handy if you were using the tool programmatically. This tool would be available through a terminal and looks something like this, and as you'll also see in several later modules. You can find it on your own system at these paths. The paths are also available in the workbook. So how and why do you create a primary index for a bucket in Couchbase? Well, you would use this nickel syntax, create primary index on, followed by a bucket name. Optionally, you could flag whether to use global secondary indexing or views. So this will enable you to execute ad hoc queries for a bucket. The performance might not be what you want, in which case you may choose to build a secondary index, and we'll be showing you how to do that. But this allows you to execute virtually any query against that bucket in nickel. The index service must be available, and the bucket must be available. It's going to be created through the global secondary indexing or index service by default, but as you see, you can alternately use the MapReduce views functionality in Couchbase. So in a terminal, it might look like this. The result that you'll get back might look like this, indicating that there's a successful result, along with some additional metadata about the request that we'll discuss in further detail in a later module. So in the demo and lab, we're going to go in and make sure that you get Couchbase Server configured correctly. We'll create and load the data bucket with sample data as well. Now, once you've finished installing Couchbase 4.0, it should automatically launch this page. If not, you could open the administrative console using a tool in your operating system, or open a web browser and browse to 127.001:8091, and you should reach the cluster overview page for your local installation. Go ahead and look through this interface at your leisure, but for now what we want to do is create and populate the data bucket that we're going to use in this course. However, to do so, we're not going to use this interface. Instead, we'll observe results in this interface, but we'll do the activity through the terminal. Open a terminal window for your system and navigate to the folder where you downloaded CB110 Datasets Archive. And in whatever manner is appropriate for your system, extract that archive. Once you've extracted the archive, we're then going to use the tool CBdockloader. Now, it's documented in the workbook as well, along with instructions on where to find this folder in the bin directory for your particular operating system. And you might choose to do as I have and add it to your path statement so that it's easy to read. But this tool, as we saw in the slides, allows you to specify credentials, specify a node, specify a bucket name and a RAM quota if this bucket is going to be created and doesn't already exist, and then the name of an archive. In this case, you're going to load the 4 archive files that you just extracted. I'll allow you to complete that in your own time. I won't do the complete demonstration here. Instead, I'm going to assume that you've completed that process and show you how to go about setting up the primary index. To do this, you'll launch the Couchbase query tool, also from the command line. The instructions on how to find it are in the workbook. To launch it, just launch CBQ, and on the CBQ command line, execute this query, create primary index on. And this is where you'll want to use the name of the bucket that was created. Now, just to be very clear about things here, I'll go back to the administrative interface, go to the data bucket screen, and if you've used CBdockloader to load Couch Music 1, you should see Couch Music 1 available here under your data bucket screen with a proper item count as specified in the workbook. So if you have that, then back in the terminal, you'll be able to create primary index on Couch Music 1. Always end your queries with a semicolon. Capitalization is conventional for nickel, as it would be for SQL. Execute the query. and in an amount of time that will be shown under elapsed time and execution time, your primary index should be created. We'll look in detail at what the various pieces of metadata that you see come back after each query mean, but for now, you're ready to execute ad hoc queries against the Couch Music 1 data bucket, and we'll do so in the upcoming module. Stick around, obviously, there's a great deal more to learn about Nickel.